So my name is Lucy Kimball. I'm Professor of Contemporary Design Practices and Director of the Social Design Institute at UAL. This is one of our UAL buildings. Welcome to today's workshop, which is the first of a new network that we have been awarded by the AHRC, and with Professor Liz Richardson, Professor of Public Policy at Manchester University, I'm co-chairing. So Liz is co-chairing remotely from Manchester, I'm co-chairing here. Let's see how well that works. So I'm just going to give a brief welcome, first of all, to our three speakers today, two of whom we have in person and one joining remotely, and we'll introduce them in a bit. And some members of our steering group for the network, of which Carla is one, and also, advisory board, and we also have a steering group, and we have several of those people in the room and online today. So welcome to all of you. And before we move forward, I just want to note the, acknowledge the 72 people who lost their lives in the Grenfell Tower anniversary last year, as I'm sure you're aware. A sort of horrendous example of failures of public policy design, and not making any claims that our network is going to directly address things like this, but nonetheless it seems important to acknowledge the structural inequalities and realities and lived experience within which the landscape in which we're talking today. We will be following the Chatham House rule, so we want this to be an open conversation. We do have public servants in the room, civil servants, people working in different kinds of setting, who we really want to talk as openly as possible about the potential and the implications of policy design. So other than Carla, who we will be filming, everything else will be following the Chatham House rule, which means please no attribution to any individual or organisation outside of this event, including on Twitter if you're live tweeting now. And for that reason, we're not live tweeting. We want this to be about the discussions in the room today. However, some of our team are taking notes, but again, without attribution. So I'm now going to hand over to Liz, hopefully, who's going to set the scene for about 5 minutes. So over to you, Liz.
Great, thanks very much, Lucy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great stuff. So this event is the first event in a series of 4 workshops where we've been funded for a small amount of money from the Arts and Humanities Research Council to create a network of people who are interested in the idea of design and the idea of doing more design in more places and better theorising of design. And for me, the idea, one of the ideas that it's a key element of design is the idea of creative thinking. So going back to one of the absolute classics, Newell, Shaw and Simon in 1962, and they said that creative thinking is when a product of thinking is novel, when thinking is unconventional and requires persistence at high intensity, and part of the task is itself to define the problem in the first place, because problems might be vague or ill-defined. So I think that's a very good definition of what we might hope to do today. In their blog, Lucy and Andrew Knight from the Civil Service set out the opportunities for design in 2022. So we're riding, really, I would say, on a bit of an academic and policy wave currently, but it's still, in terms of practice, but also in terms of theorising, relatively ad hoc and fragmented. There's lots of talking across purposes, or not talking at all in the case of some academic disciplines. So it's really time, we think, to help try and grow the field in terms of maturity and scale and be part of the growing pains of this field of design science and design practice, although we hope neither to be immature or painful, particularly today. It's an ever-present risk that we might have some pain because there are so many unresolved issues and questions in this field, by which I mean the practice of design, the policy infrastructure and processes that enable design to happen in public policy, and design science or design thinking or design theorising in the academic sphere. So, for example, me and many others have wrestled with how to conceive of design as an organic, emergent, everyday process rather than a standalone or set piece activity. And while I might have started with a quote from some of the foundational thinkers in this field, we're also starting to question this origin story of design as a neat discipline conceived of by these greats, who are these Western white male thinkers. So there's so many questions that we might want to ask, and we hope to at least set out what the questions are. We might hear today about how design theory has possibly shot itself in the foot. Possibly we might hear about whether some professions find it easier to think like designers than others. So I'm very excited about today. So this is, as I said, the first workshop in a series of 4 workshops. Today we're trying to look at frustrations, tensions, and just where the gaps and puzzles are. The next event will look at untapped potential ideas from design thinking, such as materiality, that could enhance public policy processes. Then we'll move to look at the role of design in democracy, and then we'll wrap up, and then we'll hopefully share in 18 months' time as a product or series of products from these activities. But as for today, let's see where we get to. I'm going to hand back to Lucy at this point, who's going to introduce our 3 speakers and 3 provocations.
Thank you, Liz. I'm going to stand over here because I think this is where the microphone is so that the online people can hear me. So we have 3 speakers who have been invited to give a provocation, and I'll just introduce all of them. First is Dr. Carla Groom, who did her PhD in social psychology in the States and postdoc work there before then joining the civil service and being at the Department of Work and Pensions for 11 years, I think. A bit more than that. 15 years. And who's Deputy Director leading what's currently called the Behavioural Science team. And Carla and I have several years of dialogue now in discussions of design and evidence and change inside the civil service. Our second speaker is Professor Paul Kearney from the University of Stirling, Professor of Politics and Public Policy, and I strongly recommend his blog, which I really think is brilliant. It has sort of 1,000-word versions, and then 750-word versions, and then 100-word versions, so short versions, sort of bite-sized versions of really important ideas around public policy and politics. And our third speaker is Professor Anne Light, an expert in interaction design and participatory design, working between the University of Sussex, where she's Professor of Design and Creative Technology, as well as Professor of Design and Social Change and Sustainability at Malmö University, Sweden, and is currently working on a new book around anticipatory design and sustainability and participation. So all of our workshops will have a speaker from design, a speaker from practice, and then studies of political science, political theory. And the workshop really is trying to bring those together for the first time and then look at, so we'll talk more later about what we try to produce. So I'm going to hand over to Carla, and all of these speakers will speak for approximately 10 minutes, and then we'll have joint Q&A at the end. So why is Director of Behavioural Science sitting here opening a discussion about design? And it's partly because we have a unique history. When I was asked to set up this team in 2015, the Policy Director General who asked us to set it up had a wide range of problems that he was hoping this would solve, one of which was to bring user-centred thinking into policy making, because he had a hunch that this would be a missed opportunity otherwise. And also, unlike other behavioural science teams in government, which were modelled on the kind of nudge movement and the behavioural insights approach, we were actually asked to look at ourselves. So we were asked to look at what was the experience and the magic ingredients involved in automatic enrolment into workplace pensions, which is a set of reforms, the biggest, most successful implementation of psychological thinking into policy making anywhere in the world. It was also my first policy job back in 2007. So the idea here was to say, actually, rather than import ideas into DWP, if we did that, what was the capability that we needed, and then could we spread that across the rest of the department to build the capability for us to pull that kind of trick off again? So my team is unusual, and we were let loose in 2015, a bunch of psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, to pick and choose whatever tools seemed to be useful and start to have a bit of a go at some of the hardest problems that other approaches had not managed to crack for the Department for Work and Pensions. And the overwhelming answer that we found was that user-centered design techniques seemed to be the most useful, whether that was looking at user needs and user stories, problem statements, agile project management, iterative design, prototyping. We use these day in, day out, and we've had a lot of success in making inroads into operational problems, policy problems, and organisational problems. And in fact, the fusion, I think, is particularly valuable of bringing social scientists who have a theoretical and evidence-based kind of approach and predilection, fusing that with systems thinking, a deep understanding of policy and design thinking. So, in fact, if we'd seen the recent design council...
So just do that head progressive man, I'm like, oh no.
Behavioural science, but it doesn't really matter. That's what we've discovered. And it's not really surprising that design has turned out to be so useful in the department, because if you look at automatic enrolment and what made it a success, a lot of it was design thinking. So when the Pensions Commission started during the early Blair years to look at the problem of the ageing population, the emerging pensions crisis, the very first thing they did was to look at the problem. The first report was just data. They also did deliberative research. They brought in people from ordinary people to think about the trade-offs involved. Do you want pensioners to get poorer, taxes to go up, work longer or save more? Saying none of those wasn't really an option. So you got people to come together to think about trade-offs and difficult decisions. We landed on the idea of saving more. How could we do that? This idea of automatically enrolling people in, even though economic theory would have said if people weren't already in pensions and you put them in, they were going to opt out. Well, it actually doesn't take a behavioural scientist to know that's not true. You just have to think for 10 minutes. But so the actual magic of automatic enrolment wasn't necessarily just that idea. It was the way in which the landscape was changed and prepared for that idea to land. And then the process of implementation was also iterative, piece by piece, and collaborative rather than top-down hierarchical decision-making. We made it with the pensions industry, with the consumer bodies, with the unions, with all the institutions involved in implementing it. As a result, it's one of the most successful programmes, never mind behavioural scientific programmes, in the UK government, and is adding about £20 billion a year of extra savings to the private pension world. So if these approaches are so useful, why are we not using them more? And I thought I'd be slightly cheeky here and actually bring a tool that isn't from the design toolkit, it's from the behavioural science toolkit, which is called COMB. It comes from health psychology. And the B is behaviour, and it's a way of diagnosing what are the barriers to that behaviour you might be looking for. And the C, the O, and the M stand for capability barriers, opportunity barriers, and motivational barriers. So let me have a go at working out why the behaviour, picking up these tools and running with them in policy is not happening with the frequency and depth that we might like to, that we might hope for. So capability. I'm definitely not a design specialist. I'm an enthusiastic amateur and a stealer and magpie in the design world, and that's why I work with Lucy, who does know what she's talking about. Design tools seem to be deceptively simple, and the reasons why they work are actually really complex, and then they're a bit psychological. They direct your attention towards problems in particular ways. It doesn't always matter to understand how a tool works in order to use it, but if you're taking tools that are developed in one context for design and bringing them into complex policy making that might be a very different kind of problem, you need to adapt them. To adapt them takes a deep understanding of the mechanism by which those design tools work and the confidence to change them. So things like dealing with the multiple users and trade-offs involved in policy does require adaptation of design thinking that isn't straightforward or obvious. And too often, policy understanding of design is superficial and it essentially amounts to a wish for magic beans and ends up just yielding shiny reports, a bit of a veneer, and if you're lucky, a new application of technology that the designers happen to be aware of and can think of to solve the problem. But that's not really realising the full potential of design thinking in policy. And it tends to end up being all about the workshops. Workshops are really important, but it's so much more. So that's the capability barriers. Opportunity barriers. Decisions in a democracy require justification, and especially with significant public funds, and as Lucy alluded to with Grenfell, lives at stake. Design approaches can be fused with that level of evidence and justification, but again, it takes skill, confidence. And there's still often a disconnect between what you might call, and in fact, the cognitive scientist John Vervaeke has called insight and inference. So that process of insight, where something comes out of nowhere and is that connection that you need, versus inference, which you can explain how you got there, you can be reasonably predictable that you're going to get there, and you can explain how you got there. It is easier and more traditional to explain the inference rather than the insight process in policy making. Doesn't mean you can't bring insight, but that is the precedent, that is what is expected. And it takes skill to be able to bring those together. And when it comes to design, bringing in people from a design background, the preferences for stripped down presentation, limited record keeping, and a non-hierarchical voting-based approach to decision making just aren't really going to cut it in a policy world. So you have genuine needs in policy for audit, nuance, and carefully monitored delegation of decision making from ministers. We have real power, and that power needs to be deployed correctly and in a democratically honourable way. So again, doable, but I don't really think that the problem is necessarily having money or time, but it is about having justification to spend that money and time on the right things. Motivation. Where policy is properly oriented to outcomes, as is increasingly happening across my policy career, policy is in the right place. Sometimes, actually, the outcomes that policy is looking for are outputs, in which case design isn't necessarily going to get you there, or you need to brief your designers that you need something different. As that transition becomes more complete, I think the motivations of policy will become in the right place to take on board more and more of the design approaches. But there's still also a temptation of policymakers to simplify their enormously complex spaces by dividing up the system and fixing constraints in place and saying, okay, well, you can't change this, this, or this, but can you solve this unbelievably knotty, wicked problem? And that just doesn't really work. And if you look at automatic enrolment, we ended up challenging the assumption that the payroll system of an entire country was up for grabs. It wasn't fixed. You could change it so that money was being defaulted into old age payment instead of at the time that you added value to the employer. So what is left for designers to do if you come in and you say, no, you can't change that, or that, and all these other people that you need to involve aren't in the room? Well, what you're going to get is a set of pretty reports and a superficial, what Richard Feynman might call cargo cult policy design. And I'm going to be slightly cheeky here and say, wouldn't it be nice if when people reported on Twitter and were sharing their experiences of policy design, that maybe in the future we might see it accompanied by a picture of a systems map of a problem, or even a stakeholder map of the people involved in it, rather than a picture of people looking thoughtfully and earnestly at some coloured bits of paper. I am exaggerating for effect here, but there is so much more to design thinking than post-it notes and Sharpies, although I'm never without either. Also, design folks, they have their issues too. They can be a bit tribal and they can be a bit anarchic, and those kinds of things really need to be left at the door. I don't think policy people are as likely to do that, and we need to come together and listen to each other. And I understand it because good designers who are in immature organisations can find it absolutely soul-destroying to see that low-hanging fruit and not be able to grab it. But just as much, inexperienced designers in committed organisations can sabotage even really well set up organisational design and miss the opportunity to really learn and create alongside their policy colleagues, not doing it to them. And I think today is going to be the marking the beginning of the end of that cargo cult and the end of the beginning of actually bringing design to policy making.
Thank you.